Here today with the Tier 8 Premium USN Carrier, the Saipan. So, got this thing out of a premium container recently. The last few of those have come in. So, looks like this is going to be it. But I was lucky enough to score a Saipan, so that pleases me. So the Saipan is a Baltimore hull with a flight deck strapped on at Tier 8. And this is reflected in her hit point pool and her armor. So pretty low hit point pool, and basically unarmored, the armor belt being much thinner than many of her counterparts because she is indeed a cruiser. She is, however, as a result, quite stealthy at 10.7 with Concealment Expert and no module, and is actually quite small physically in size. And she's also pretty fast. Does a good 33 knots. So, the hull on the Saipan is, well, pretty mediocre. Oh, lastly, I need to mention that the AA defense is pretty unique amongst the carriers. So the Saipan is unique in that she has no long-range AA. She only has short-range and mid-range, and it's pretty pathetic, to be honest. It's nothing special at all. And this, coupled with her poor torpedo protection and her low hit point pool, means that the Saipan is unique amongst all of the Tier 8 carriers in being quite vulnerable to being CV sniped, especially to a carrier like Kaga or Enterprise, which can just punch through the defensive fighter that the carrier launches and hit you because of the size of the squadrons that they launch. So that is one thing to keep note of. Saipan has a overall pretty crappy hull, which is vulnerable to CV snipes. So before we jump into the game here, I'm just going to go briefly into the modules. So the Saipan is also special, on top of having a crappy hull, in having Tier 10 planes. So she has the strongest planes on an individual basis of any Tier 8 carrier, obviously, because she's using up-tiered planes. So she has the Bearcats and the BTDs of the Midway. And so these are tiny, tiny little squadrons. You get squadrons of 6 with attack flights of 2 with each type of aircraft. So that's 6 Bearcats with 2 in an attack wave launching Tiny Tims. So that's 6 Tiny Tims per attack wave, 4 torpedoes with the BTDs per attack wave, and 4 HE bombs with the BTDs per attack wave. So I'll continue to discuss this as we come into the game. So I'm just going to queue up. Don't want to keep this this recording to be too long. So the thing about these tiny squadrons is that normally your squadron size is 1.5 times the size, your total flight deck size is 1.5 times the total size of your attack squad. So your attack squadron is 6 in this case, so your flight deck is 9. So you only have 9 of each type of aircraft by default, so that's 9 rockets, 9 TBs, and 9 DBs. With the flight deck upgrade, which gives you +2 flight deck, you get up to 11 per plane type. This gives you a total hangar of 33 at the beginning of the match, which, if you know anything about the Tier 8 carriers, is absolutely tiny. It's probably half of what most other carriers are working with, if that. And in addition, the regeneration time on all of her planes is extremely long. So if I just start the battle here and press Alt, you'll see, okay, well I can't show you right now apparently, but the restoration time on both for torpedo bombers and dive bombers is over 2 minutes, and the rocket planes is just under 1 minute. So we're in a Tier 10 match, and they have a Minotaur and Moskva, which is pretty disgusting, and a Seattle. So a bunch of pretty disgusting AA ships. The BBs are pretty whatever. I'm against a Kaga, and there's 3 DDs. So I'm going to start off by launching my attack planes, but because there's a Minotaur and a Moskva, both of which have very long-range AA, the Minotaur in particular, oh, and the Seattle actually. The Minotaur and Seattle in particular being able to stealth AA, I'm going to ditch a set of rockets because these are very much at risk of me accidentally stumbling into the Minotaur and just losing the squadron to the AA. Because even though these are Tier 10 planes with Tier 10 health pool, I'm missing the Tier 10 module. So these planes are slightly less tanky than they would be if they were on the Midway. And because the total squadron size is smaller, I distribute the continuous AA damage much less efficiently. It's distributed over tiny squadron size of 4 rather than anything else. And oh, there's the most dangerous AA ship in the match. Yeah, just a tiny amount of time in that chip damage long range AA stripped almost 2,000 health off my planes. So here I'm just looking for the GDs, guarding. There's the Moskva, don't want to stray too near him either, 6.6 on his AA. And I found a Fletcher. Ping him for my allies. Gonna fly away. I'm gonna let him go in this case. He smoked outside of the cap, so even just by flying over, I'd have delayed him. So I don't know if you noticed when I launched my dish squadron, but because I'm only having 2 attack planes per wave, one of the problems that the Saipan has that the Midway doesn't suffer from is that you often miss your attack rockets, because compared to the 9 rockets that launch from 3 planes that the Midway has, the 6 rockets with the same reticle is actually somewhat inaccurate. So you end up missing your hits a lot, especially on smaller targets. Oh, trimming my planes here. Oh, looks like we're pulling away. Some Minotaurs in there. So yeah, because of the reduced squadron size, with the dive bombers and the rockets, you tend to miss a lot. The torpedo bombers are something a bit different. So most of the other American carriers in this game are dive bomber focused, even the Enterprise with her squadron of 3, or sorry, her squadron of 9 and flights of 3 AP dive bombers with 2 bombs each is pretty dive bomber focused. But the Saipan is different from her peers in that she's pretty torpedo bomber focused. The torpedo bombers on the Saipan are one of her stronger squadrons, I would say, because the dive bombers become a bit less reliable due to the small squadron size. But the torpedo bombers remain pretty potent. This is because they're unnerfed Midway TBs. So Midway TBs used to hit for 5.5k alpha-ish. Oh, actually it's 6.4k alpha-ish, and I believe they've been nerfed to something like 5.5 or like maybe even like 4.8. Which means they kind of hit like wet noodles right now. And they have an extremely wide cone, but the Saipan keeps the former unnerfed damage while still keeping that cone, which allows her to do things like this. Now they're not very fast, but if you focus in the reticle, you can get quite a few hits, and that Seattle just ate shit. My goodness. So they're quite potent, as you can see here. So here I'm going to punch in because he's popped his... Oh, he hasn't popped defensive actually, which is odd. So the torpedo bombers are very strong, and you should be using them on the Saipan, to be quite frank. Oh, I didn't get any hits. Interesting. Okay, they're just slow. So now I'm going to demonstrate the dive bombers. And so there's the same bombs, 11,000 HE alpha as the tier 10s, but with only 2 planes in an attack wave, they become a bit less reliable and less accurate overall. Which means that while you normally would just essentially use your Midway dive bombers as your preferred armament, the torpedo bombers here become a very viable option against a wide variety of targets due to the much higher alpha and the increased reliability, because the spread of the cone is also much narrower than the Midways, because there's just, well, one less plane. So what this like high quality plane but hard to replace plane thing creates, or feature creates, is that you get a carrier where it's very punishing on mistakes. Kind of a, shall we say, no mistakes allowed kind of carrier. So here the Seattle pop defensive, so this is going to be a very expensive strike. I was looking for fire, but I didn't get it. Let me see if I can fly this buddy out. Looks like no. So there, you saw I lost an entire dive bomber squadron. I lost all 6 planes here, and now I only have 5 out of 11. And here the next plane is going to come up in 35 seconds. So in 35 seconds I'll have a full squadron again. But then the next plane after that will take a full 128 seconds. That's over 2 minutes before I get my 7th plane back. So as a result, when you make a mistake, or like when you take a risk rather, and you attack a high AA target like that, and you lose your planes and don't get them back, it can be very punishing. Over the course of a game, these squadron losses are really gonna impact your ability to inflict damage if you're not careful. That was unfortunate. I was hoping to get a fire. I did land all my rockets there. Hoping to get a fire there. Okay, I was gonna peel off for the Seattle, but at this kind of health. Oh, okay, the Moskva popped defensive. Well, that's fine. I'm gonna launch the attack planes anyway, even though it's somewhat inadvisable. Because I want to get to that Seattle. Or maybe I'll hit the Moskva again. So there, you saw with a Moskva-sized target, you can land all the rockets. And if you do wait for a nice tight reticle, it's not too bad. But if you have to do any kind of maneuvering, which makes the reticle on the Tiny Tims quite large, it can be quite detrimental to your ability to get an accurate drop. Essentially any kind of attack where you take heavy losses, especially like that dive bomber attack run I made just earlier, could be considered a mistake. There's my fire. You really don't want to be making those kinds of errors in this ship because you can't afford to. Ooh. That was expensive as well. Lost 3 of my planes immediately. So there's a Seattle that was kind of low, but there's more importantly an FDG, which is much less thorny. So here I have my dive bombers, as I said, that 35 seconds ticked over, and I got my 6th plane, but now my dive bomber reserves are going to be empty after this attack. So typically when you have a full reserve like this, you want to use that squadron, so that because they don't tick right now, there's no like over tick when you have full torpedo bomber squadron. You don't bank up a 12th plane when you lift off. The timer will only start ticking once you do take off those planes. I'm just using the dive bombers here because it's more convenient, and also because they're a more potent attack craft if you can land all 4 bombs, which I can do here with the FDG. I'm looking for a midsection fire. Perfectly willing to sacrifice some planes for this, especially on a low AA target that's taken HE damage. Dodge the flak. So the planes themselves are very maneuverable, just like the midway tier 10s. My guess is that he's actually going to put out the fires. So as I was saying, I'm going to launch my TVs. Oh, he's ticking, actually. He's fighting with a heel though, as you saw. So damage has stopped ticking. He's used his damage control. Gonna fly onto the edge. But yeah, only now does the timer start ticking. As I left, the 2-minute timer started. But ultimately, you want to stagger your squadrons. A little bit at least. It's probably going to be reversing given the game state. It's my best guess. Doesn't really matter. An FDG sized target is just a free meal for a carrier like me. So there's another DD here. So I'm going to wait for him to die, and then I'm going to swing around for the Kagero. So normally midway torpedo bombers, not my preferred choice of armament. Oh, he's turning. But given I'm already here and have nothing else to attack, so he's going to turn all the way out to try and dodge the Moskva. So they're pretty slow, but I might be able to skim him here because he's not moving at speed. He was in a hard turn. And even just one torp is pretty crippling to a destroyer-sized target. Is he going to turn in? Okay, no. Oh, my team is losing very badly, though. Probably going to go all the way around. So I wasn't able to clean up the target there, but it's a Kagero who didn't smoke. He may or may not have radar, to be honest. Or sorry, smoke screen. My teammates seem to have gotten quite smoked, shall we say. So I'm just hunting for the Kagero we left behind. Really have no idea where he would go. Probably swung around to sea, if I had to guess. Nope, there he is. So he's chipping away with his tier 8A, but he's a tier 8 destroyer versus tier 10 planes. He's slowing down to try and dodge. Respectable. And I got a pretty, what I would call a pretty lucky drop there. With only 4 bombs, it's pretty hard to guarantee accurate hits. Now I only need to hit him with 1 bomb, so it's not too bad. But this is still a pretty difficult target lineup. Okay, smashed him. So normally I would consider attacking that, but as you saw, the Yamato launched his fighter. So I'm actually going to attack the Yamato in the north. There's not much time left. My team is going to lose this. There's almost certainly no way that my team can come back from this deficit. But you can see here, even in tier 10 matchmaking with my team basically killing themselves, I've been able to have a significant impact on the match. And this is as a tier 8 carrier. This is something that most other tier 8s are unable to do. In my mind, it's probably extremely unlikely that the Kaga will have had as good of a game as I have. So this is a pretty risky attack here because there's many fighters in the area. I'm temporarily invulnerable. You saw a nice 10k strike there. I'm going to try and save them by entering into an attack run. Oh, no, not quite. So that time I got a 10k HE rocket strike there. But that's pretty like atypical, I would say. And this is the most broadsiding the Yami, so fully expecting him to die here. My allies are dying. Ditch the bombs. Just going for 1 clean strike on the Yamato to follow up fire. This is a suicide run no matter what, because he's beside a Minotaur. And there's a fighter. Just want to get my fire damage. Nope, no fire for me. Yikes. Oh, that's fine. The Yamato is still pushing out. Give my Izumo a protective... Oh, he's flooding. Another protective fighter, because he wandered outside of this one. Looking for another rocket strike. Just the 2 planes. These guys are definitely not coming back. Alright, he died. That's good. Gonna use torpedo bombers then. Keep pumping out fighter planes. Can hopefully punish. So he's dead now. I need my opponent's planes to leave. Oh, and the game ended. So yeah, we lost. But there, I hope you could see the power of the Saipan, right? So my team was dying, so yes, we did lose. But even with my tiny little squadrons of tier 10 planes, over the course of the match, I was able to have a decent impact, right? Like you saw the midway torpedo bombers, which are unnerfed, doing a devastating amount of damage to cruisers and battleships alike. That's Seattle at the beginning of the game, in particular, for example, took a ton of damage. As well, the rockets, because they're the tiny Tims with 67 millimeters of penetration, something odd, or 63, something like that, they're able to hit basically whatever you want. And as long as the rocket touches the target, you'll deal damage. And same goes for the bombs. The bombs are inconsistent. But overall, the Saipan, unsurprising, the Saipan is a extremely powerful tier 8 carrier. But you get punished for your mistakes very dearly, right? So over the course of the game, I lost a significant amount of dive bombers and rockets, and if you saw there, towards the end of the game, sorry, I was basically running on my last few dregs of my dive bombers and rocket planes, and if the game had continued, I would have had to basically lean on my torpedo bombers, and even then, going up against a Minotaur, basically all my attacks would have been suicidal, so probably would have had to attack with 2 torpedo bombers over and over again to try and whittle him down. If we look at the damage distribution here, it's fairly mixed actually. So we have a small amount of dots. Some games will still be higher, some games will be lower. But here the rockets did 20k, the bombs did 40k, the torpedoes did 40k. So overall it's a very, very good carrier because for its tier, all of its weapon systems are effective. They do vary in levels of effectiveness. When you're top tier, your rockets and dive bombers will become more potent. When you're bottom tier, your torpedo bombers will become more potent. But overall, in most matchmaking, bottom or top tier, the Saipan will be extremely effective, and that is why, in my opinion, this is one of the better tier 8 premiums. And hopefully, if you're planning on getting the Saipan, or if you do have the Saipan, this commentary kind of helped you out in explaining how you want to use the Saipan in your planes. And until next time, cheers!